Trading Time with your host, John Rousseau.
John Fennell is a hydrogeologist. He has spent the last 30 years mapping groundwater in both British Columbia and Alberta. He has so much amazing insight into the way groundwater moves throughout our province, and I am fascinated by the subject. The main focus of our discussion today is the Meadow Valley Aquifer, Aquifer 299 in our area. And we're also going to touch on Aquifer 300, which is the aquifer that we're in right now. I think that there has been a lot of scare put into the hearts and minds of the local residents, which we hope to dispel with this dialogue. There's a lot of water, and there's more where that came from. And I hope to shed some light on that with my conversation with Master John Fennell today. I'm struggling with this analogy, but maybe you can humor me.
Okay.
I'm driving a 1979 Corolla down the road, and it breaks down. Does that mean that nobody else can drive cars down the road?
Yeah.
Even though you're driving a new 2022 Ford or whatever you're driving, you know what I'm saying? Like it just, we had a problem with some infrastructure up here a long time ago.
Yeah, and it's fixed.
And people had wells that were initially drilled by a developer. And you and I both know that a developer drills as deep as they have to in order to suffice the water quantity for their development. And that's it. They're not going to over drill it. Whereas a homeowner would over drill it. They'd say, no, I want to have that storage in the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to have an improved cistern in the ground. It needs to be deeper because we are in Canada's only desert. So I don't want, what I feel is happening. Are you rolling? That's great. What I feel is happening is that we are taking all this anecdotal information and stories of people's wells going dry, and we are projecting them as the whole picture for this area. We're out of water. There's no water. And it just seems to have been sensationalized over the years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, there is a general misunderstanding of groundwater resources in general. I mean, I've been in this career for 35 years. I've been on the industry side, I've been on the public side, I've been on the government side, I've worked with academia, and I've seen all different angles.
Can you give, John, take a moment please and help us out to understand the full depth of your understanding of this from a credentials perspective and some more detail into where you've worked in the past. I would just love to know as well.
Sure. Well, I started my career back in the mid-'80s. In the natural resource sector, oil and gas, as a geologist, and I worked that for a number of years and gained an interest in groundwater in particular, and so I shifted my career in 1990 and went into the environmental sciences. I joined a company as an environmental scientist, and I soon became very interested in getting a master's degree in hydrogeology, which I did. From the University of Calgary in 1996. I carried on with my career and got even more interested in geochemistry and carried on and did a doctorate degree in that in 2008. So that's my scholastic path.
Okay.
As I said, I've been in my career for over 35 years now, working domestically here in Canada, internationally in Mexico, South America, the Middle East, Australia.
Wow.
So I've had my chance to experience the world from that science that I'm so interested in, and I've also gained a lot of different perspectives on water and groundwater in particular. So that's my kind of my world view. Certainly locally, and I've worked with industries, oil and gas industries around their water management, their water supply, disposal, that type of thing. public, with private owners wanting to secure a water supply,
Yes.
or cooperatives that are banding together and having a communal well and understanding that. Lots of developers to get water for residents so they can develop their lands and add to the tax base. And as we grow, I mean, people have to have a place to go.
People have to have a place to live in Canada.
They have to have a place to live in Canada. I mean, we read in the news all the time about the housing shortages and got homeless people in Summerland, for God's sake. I mean, how is that even possible in a country like Canada? But it is.
In a region that's so sparsely populated,
Yeah.
with such an incredible amount of per capita millionaires.
Yeah.
It's the largest number of millionaires per capita in the country.
Yeah.
And we have
Exactly.
a housing detail that we're
And
worried
that's
about.
and that's a total other topic, right?
Yeah.
What I'm finding is, people's understanding of groundwater, it's something you can't see it. That's the problem, right? So if you can't see it, people just make stuff up, right? Mm-hmm. I deal with this all the time in my career and having to set the record straight. This is about facts. This is about science. This is about engineering. This is about understanding something you can't see. And I'm trained in that. And I've spent a long time working in this field and understanding it and upskilling myself and getting my professional credentials, being registered with the Engineers in Geoscience BC, getting my license to practice, going through all that so I can hold myself out as a professional. And hopefully, people will see that and appreciate that, because it's been a lot of effort to get here.
Yeah.
Constant
work.
Well, yeah, it's constant improvement
work.
and constant improvement and upskilling and and working on projects and looking for the best solutions and keeping an open mind and being non-biased, because I am a scientist. In science, the only quest is the truth. There's no alternative truths. There's the truth, right? You know what I mean?
I do.
In this world, it's a different world now, than decades ago. So we have to deal with some misinformation and misunderstandings. But, I don't think it's nefarious at all. I think people are just trying to understand. But if you keep an open mind and you don't cherry pick the facts, then you'll usually get the right answer.
Cherry picking.
Well, I see a little bit of that going on.
Mm-hmm.
People fabricating, taking facts to support their
initial position that may need some revision.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that fits with my initial presupposition of the situation. Let's just run with that.
Let's run with that. Oh, but there's a counter point here. Well, that's irrelevant. I mean,
because that wasn't our initial position.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a bit dangerous, and as a society heading down that slippery slope. But you know what? A person like myself, just maintain your integrity and hold your ground. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that overview. Yeah. The more research that I've been doing into groundwater in our area, it's just amazing some of the people that I've run into. It's almost, I don't want to say that anything is an accident. Obviously, our working together is not an accident. But one of the things that I've heard is the scarcity of people with your qualifications. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is I wouldn't, scarcity would be a tough word to back up. I mean, there are a lot of professionals around. I mean, we've got Okanagan, UBCO, right? We've got a whole groundwater department there. I mean, there's lots of experts around. I've been long in the game, obviously, mm-hmm. and I've had this diverse world experience and things like that. So maybe from that perspective, there might not be as many people that would have the same type of experience that I've had, but they're having their experiences as well. Mm-hmm. I really kind of shy away from saying, well, this guy's the best or this guy's the best. No, we're all doing the best that we can.
Yes.
And, some are better than others. But part of the process of getting accredited is to make sure that you have the credentials and that you're holding yourself out in good faith and doing a good job.
Yeah.
When I put my stamp on things, I mean, that means something. I'm taking personal ownership of that and responsibility for the information that people are relying on. I'm hoping they're reading it because it's important.
Isn't it?
It's important to understand. I know it can be dry, but when you're putting a document out into the public, you don't know who's going to be reading it. It could be, a peer.
Another professional reviewing it.
It could just be an ordinary person off the street. But there's a certain amount of information that needs to be put into those reports to back things up. You can't just say things, you have to back them up with facts, and references and data sources, and they all have to be credible in order to get to the right answer.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do as professionals. We have to sift through the mire and get to the appropriate information and pull it together so people can understand it at various levels. And I understand not everybody's proficient and trained in groundwater sciences.
Delineating your report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. That's competition for me, right?
Exactly. Yeah, truly. Yeah.
But it is a mysterious world. I think a lot of people, don't completely understand it. And my job is to demystify it.
I got a coffee coming in for you here.
Okay.
Okay, let's pick up where we were.
So we're talking about groundwater, and we've been dealing at a fairly high level on this, but I know that there's local issues that have occurred, and there's an opportunity to maybe dispel some of the misunderstandings around that.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I kind of wanted to bring some light to is that we hear from the regional district, we hear from the District of Summerland. For instance, you're going to see this. This is your second summer in Summerland, so the water restrictions.
Yeah.
We're running out of water. And we hear that here. We're running out of. What does that mean?
We're not running out of water. I think what the challenges are is that water isn't happening all the time everywhere.
No.
It has a seasonality to it. And a lot of the water that we get is from precipitation, obviously, snowpack, things like that. Those are changing with the changing climate. And so it's not that we're running out of water, we just have to change the way that we think and manage water. That's it. I'm an optimist when it comes to water. There's plenty of water. Yes, I know the creeks can run a little bit slow at later times of the year, which can create some problems, particularly if people are taking too much water out. I mean, obviously you need to leave some water in the system for the ecosystem to function.
Of course.
And that's the reason why we have rules around allocations and withdrawals. Hopefully people are adhering to that. You got to give people the benefit of the doubt. But that's what licensing is all about, is to manage what we have. Now, sometimes that can go a little bit sideways. If we were allocating water in a wet period and then we get into a dry period, well, then you can run into situations where there could be over allocations. And that means, okay, everybody's got to step back. So that's watering restrictions. That's a management tactic, right? Conservation and efficiency only gets you so far. You might have to take it to, watering restrictions, or even curtailments. I mean, we've seen this. I've seen this before, where licenses are just suspended because there's not enough water for them to take from the system. Now that's usually around industrial water.
Okay.
In Canada and in British Columbia and other provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan, residents, like a local individual like yourself, has a statutory right to a certain amount of water under the Act. So
it's 2,000 liters a day?
2,000 liters a day under the Water Sustainability Act. That's Lieutenant Governor basically says that's what your statutory right. And so, you don't have to get a license. But for more than that,
if you live in British Columbia, no matter what, you have access to 2,000 liters of drinking water for whatever you want to do.
According to the Act. Now,
without a license.
Now there could be circumstances where there may be less offered if you're in a, let's say you're in a regional district or something that wants to, put some sort of, brakes on the amount of water that's being
seasonally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have the right to do that. And I think we're all just trying to manage through the water year, right? And everybody's, what gets me is when I see people with sprinklers on that shouldn't be on and water running down the street. It's just like, that's just craziness, right? You're better off just putting in underground irrigation and drip irrigation. It's much more efficient. There's smarter ways to use water in our part of the world, being one of the driest parts of Canada.
And we're seeing a lot of those tactics that you're referring to being employed in the new agricultural developments that we're seeing in Summerland and valley-wide. Yeah. When we were growing up here, it was 100% the practice to have canopy sprinklers running all the time. And when you read the Summerland Water Master Plan that was drafted in 2021, they were saying that as a result of these new sophisticated drip systems and water metering and all of these things, they're actually down 1/3 consumption in the last 10 years. And they were alluding to in the report as being a bad thing, because the infrastructure relies on a certain number of users, certain number of megaliters every year to be bought by the constituents in order to pay for the system.
Of course.
So now they're saying, well, with the less water that we're using, we're trying to figure out how to solve the money problem now. So, you see what I'm saying? It's like...
It's a catch-22 in a way. Like,
right.
Good intentions, bad result, I guess, if you want to put it that way. Right. Unintended. It's like, here's the thing. We can have these lofty goals, and we can just throw them out. We're going to reduce our water consumption by 30% by 2030. That's great. That sounds good. That's a lofty goal. Have you thought through what that means? Because you just described a situation where it had an unintended consequence.
Of course.
And so
now we don't have enough money to pay for it.
Yeah. We can't look into the future. We can only make some suppositions or predictions or things like or opinions, right? The future will deal out what the future is going to deal out. What we've proven time and time again as a society, as a species on this planet, is our adaptability. We're smart, intelligent beings.
That's right.
We can manage our way through things. We just have to get people on board with these things sometimes.
So you're saying that because of our ingenuity, we're not doomed to the circumstances of our environment, like the flies in the jar with the pear. They eat all the fruit, they overpopulate it, and then they all die. We're not in a situation like that. We can adapt. We can dam upstream. We can
use all kinds of water management strategies.
Exactly.
They're employed all around this area with all the lakes and the reservoirs, and it's a system. It's a system of storage and plumbing, right? That feeds this area.
Yeah.
All those orchards, vineyards, people, livestock, everything needs water. The ecosystem needs water. It all needs water. So we're managing it. There's plenty of water in this system at any given time. What happens is sometimes you can run into situations where there's not as much. And you get this perception that like we're running out of water. And it's just like, no, this is a seasonal thing.
All right, so then could it be said, John, that we're running out of our expectation of water? Well, at this time of year, we expect to have, and our expectations they fall short.
Listen, the whole system is controlled by the climate. Every year can be a little bit different. We can be in an El Nino cycle, we can be in a La Nina cycle, we can be in a positive phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, we can be in a negative phase. These all have influences on the water balance in our part of the world. Now what's interesting is, looking at some of the groundwater hydrographs, like the water levels over time in this area, There was a period of time where they were actually declining, probably from about the late 70s, early 80s to down to about 2010. They were on a downward trend. And it's like, oh my God, we're running out of water. Well, guess what? They're going back up again, right? Because it's
cyclical.
It's a cycle.
Yeah.
It's a cycle. Now, how do we know that? Because we've got monitoring in place and people are collecting the data and they're looking at it. Monitoring is so important because a lot of people, will think that, things stay static, and they don't. I mean, water levels go up in the spring, they go down in the summer, very much like the creeks and the rivers, much slower and not the same magnitude, but they do respond. And you see that. You see the recharge events every year, and you see the slow decline over the year into the winter period, and then the spring rains happen, and then the water levels in the wells go back up again. And so that's something that people don't understand. They just think I got a tube in the ground, the water's there, and that's where it comes from. And I've never had a problem. My water level's always good. It's just like, well, how would you know? You never measure it. So
right.
When you pump a well, the water level does go down, but when you turn the well off, the water level will come back up, right? Just a little drawdown cone, and then it comes.
So when we were looking at drawdown numbers of the Falder Community Water System well number 2, that were displayed in the Meadow Valley Aquifer study drafted by
Associated
Environmental
Engineering,
thank you. August of 2022 was when they were doing those drawdowns.
Yep.
So what would be potentially classified as like approaching the driest time of year. And we had a 0.5 of a meter drawdown at 160 gallons a minute.
Yeah.
That seems like a very strong signal of water.
Oh yeah. I mean, the Meadow Valley Aquifer is a very prolific system. I mean, it has its nuances depending on whether you're up in Meadow Valley proper or down here in Falder. It does vary. But in the North Falder part of the aquifer here, in the aquifer system, it's very prolific. I think the problems that happened back, around, 2010, 2015, when people were getting a little bit nervous, is that there was a community well that wasn't deep enough. Like it wasn't accessing enough of the aquifer. And so the decision was, and rightly so, the decision was made to put in a second well deeper. And there has never been a problem since.
Not a single one.
And so that, again, is a management approach to dealing with a perceived crisis.
Yes.
Now, your situation is a little bit different. You're in a different aquifer system.
Can you, because it's difficult for people to understand geographically how that could be different and possible. Yes.
Okay. Well, here we are, we're in the mountains. These mountains consist of, hard igneous rock, fractured and but hard rock and valleys. These valleys have accumulated sediment over time, glacial sediment, things of that nature. It's been deposited. So you've got this really porous permeable material sitting up against this less permeable. I'm not going to say zero permeability because there's always some way for water to move through rock. Mm-hmm. But it's like a channel sitting in a depression. That's what the Meadow Valley Aquifer is. It's sands and gravels and clays and things like that that's sitting in the bottom of a valley that's accumulated there over time.
So that's referred to as a confined sand.
Well, confined and unconfined is a little bit different. In the Meadow Valley Aquifer, depending on where you are, there's two intervals. There's an upper sand, and then there's a clay lens that kind of separates it from a lower sand. Okay. The community wells are in the lower sand. The upper sand is, if it's open to the atmosphere, right? It has a water table. That's called an unconfined aquifer because it's not confined from the top. Okay. Might have a confined layer on the bottom, not the top. The one at the bottom is sandwiched between low permeability bedrock and this clay, so it's confined.
Yes.
When you drill a well into a confined aquifer, the water level will usually come up in the well to a level and stabilize above where the top of that aquifer is, because it's under pressure.
Right.
The pressure comes from water flowing in along the Meadow Valley Aquifer from the north, and a little bit of mountain block recharge that might get into it through the sides and the bottom of the channels. That's how it works. So that's a confined and unconfined system. Down here, it's a confined system in the deeper part. The water is held in storage. When you pump the well, the water comes out of storage. When you turn the well off, the water level comes back to basically where it started from. And that's telling you that there's ample water in the system. Now, if you were to pump that over a long period of time, turn the well off, and it didn't come back to where it started from, that means you've taken water out of the system. You've mined the aquifer, the groundwater out of the aquifer.
But let's just for a moment suppose that is something that could potentially happen. Okay?
Okay.
We're doing a drawdown test on this new well that we put in 2015, and the water doesn't recharge as you say it's going to. That is then a consequence of something catastrophic happening upstream, no?
Something happening in the basin. It doesn't necessarily mean upstream.
Because
it could in the sense that if too much water was being taken out of Dark Creek and it wasn't being allowed to recharge back into the aquifer, which is the main source of recharge for the Meadow Valley Aquifer, is leakage through that Dark Creek.
Well, so my understanding of it, and just correct me if I'm wrong, where our community well is, 88% of the recharge is from Trout Creek proper, which is managed by Summerland, 12% out of Dark Creek.
Correct.
Now, the Meadow Valley Aquifer
Correct.
area is charged from, as you've said, Dark Creek. But as soon as we get past that down into here where our community well is
Then
located,
it's Trout Creek.
then it's Trout Creek.
Correct.
So when we're looking at those drawdown effects, would there ever be a scenario where Trout Creek is not recharging our well?
No. I mean, there's connectivity there. It's been demonstrated.
Yeah.
Physically and chemically and hydraulically.
Yeah.
So, I think as long as there's water flowing in the system in Trout Creek, which if there wasn't, that would be catastrophic.
That's what I'm saying,
for
yeah.
the community of Summerland and so really, but we've got management practices in place. We've got these reservoirs. We've got, the water's in the system. Yeah, it might go low sometimes, and we might have to curb, our appetite for water a little bit. But there's never been a time when this system went dry.
No.
In our documented history. I mean, we haven't been thousands and thousands of years ago. Maybe that's a different story, but we're talking about today. We have to talk about today.
Yeah, that's right.
And we have to talk about tomorrow. The past is the past, and that will give us an idea of what could potentially happen. And that's what geoscientists like myself use to say, okay, if I'm trying to understand the dynamics of this system, I need to look into the past in order to understand what could potentially happen in the future, but I have to tender that with how climate is changing that balance.
And from what I can recall in my delineation of the information in both the Meadow Valley Aquifer Study and the Summerland Master Plan, the models are calling for increased precipitation.
Correct.
In the next.
Yeah.
Like as far as these models are accurate, these are theoretical computer-generated models.
Sure.
But they're calling for more precipitation in the system.
I think you've brought up a very valid point, because you have to be careful with models. Some models are useful and can provide, but you have to be cautious because they are simulations based on a number of assumptions. However, in the climate modeling community out there, these professionals that have devoted their lives to building these models, calibrating them, and getting them as accurate as possible, most of the models are pointing towards precipitation increase. Is it 5%? I don't know. Is it 15%? I don't know. One model says one other says another, but they're all saying it's increase. And so the expectation in our part of the world is that it will get warmer and it will get wetter.
Because we are so close to the Pacific Ocean.
Well, yeah, that's the big distillation unit out there, I call it.
Exactly. So if it's a little warmer out there, it's going to be rainier in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, and I know this might be a little bit absurd. But if we were going to run out of water, then the ocean would have to go dry.
That's right.
And that's not going to happen.
No. And our mountains would have to shrink.
Yeah. So
the ocean would go dry and our mountains would shrink.
So really, at the end of the day, there is water in the system. I always like to clarify terms: water availability versus water reliability. Availability is, what is available at any given time. Reliability is it there all the time? And sometimes reliability can be challenged by the climate or human development. Right. Too much water being taken out.
Too much agricultural use.
Because agricultural or municipal or anything. Really, at the end of the day, the individual well owner is not having a measurable effect on water in the system underneath the ground. It is such a minuscule amount of water that a household will use in a given day that it's almost hard to even acknowledge.
Right. It's
when
fraction of a point of a percentage.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And really, though, that this is a big basin, and you've got a little bit of water coming out, 220 liters per person, or 200. I think Stats Canada has it at 274 liters per person per day in British Columbia. It's such a small amount of water. Mm-hmm. And really, what's interesting is when projections are made about how pumping is going to impact an aquifer system. It's like, okay, well, we're going to pump it at 1,000 gallons, or 150 gallons a minute, continuously, 24/7. Well, that's not how things operate.
No.
Wells turn on and off, right? Particularly like a household well. If people, people might not understand this. I've owned a system in the country, so I know how these things work. You have a pump, you drill your well, you put a pump in your well. The well pumps water into your house. There's a pressure tank. The pressure tank is set at 40 psi and 60 psi. So when you turn your tap on, your pressure is going to start dropping in your pressure tank. Once you get to 40 psi or whatever you got it set at, the pressure tank turns on. That turns on your pump. Mm-hmm. Your pump pumps the pressure back up, right, in your pressure tank until you get to 60, and it turns off. So your pump is turning on and off throughout the day, right? It's not operating continuously 24/7 and drawing that water down over a long period of time. Your water level is just going up and down in your well.
Just a little bit.
Yep, just a little bit, and it replenishes, and then you go to sleep at night, and it's got all night to replenish, and then you're good to go the next day. So,
and then I guess another thing to augment what you're saying is that not only is that the case, everything that you just said, we're taking a little bit of water at a time, using it, doing whatever we're doing. I think that people have this misconception that we use the water and it evaporates into space. We're all on septic out here.
Yeah.
So, I look at it and I go, I know that a certain amount of water in a septic system is lost to evaporation.
Not a lot. I mean,
But not a lot.
They're closed systems.
And so when we're looking at an area that is predominantly ultra high quality sand,
Yeah.
like that's all this is. It's from here to Princeton, it's just straight sand. So whatever water we're using, John, correct me if I'm wrong here, we use a little bit of it, it goes back into our septic field, a bit of it evaporates, and the rest of it goes back into the water system.
Yeah, back into the system. Yeah. So it's there's a difference between consumptive and non-consumptive use, and really in a way, the water that's used in a household is really not a very consumptive use of water. I mean, it's you're using it to do your day-to-day things, your washing, your hygiene, all that type of stuff. Maybe if you're watering your lawn too much, some of it will evaporate. Sure, I'll give you that. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's not a lot of water, and even the amount that would be lost is minuscule in the grand scheme of things.
Of course.
I water my lawn. I don't have a lawn actually, but an individual waters their lawn versus an orchard.
Oh, an orchard?
Or a vineyard. I mean, I mean, and they become efficient at it,
Yep.
right? I mean, drip irrigation and focused, we do the same thing. In our yard, we're xeriscaped, we've got focused, irrigation to the plants, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's efficiency. There's still things that can be done to make sure that water is being used properly. But you're right. Some of it's going back into the system, so it's not a loss.
No.
So
So
you're using 2,000 liters a day. Yeah, and I'm returning 1,995
Right.
or something like that.
It's not like, the Nestle truck is showing up here and we're filling up the Nestle truck.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
For bottled water here. It just seems as though that there is a lot of misconception and misinformation about this and panic.
Misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding, thank you. Misunderstanding, yes, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
yes. Because municipalities inevitably maintain these systems. I mean, you take a look at the amount of money that the District of Summerland has put into the upgrades at Thirsk Dam, recently Eisentalk Dam.
Yep. The water treatment plant.
The water treatment plant,
Uranium treatment plant here.
Yeah, which was, I think I heard something, the water treatment plant in Summerland was completely obsolete and undersized the day it was built, right? You know what I'm saying? Like it was just, so you're looking at it and you're like, that is a very impressive piece of infrastructure that they're maintaining. And not only that, but when you take a look at the breadth of the system, I believe it's the second largest concentration of water in the Okanagan Basin. I mean, this is a serious amount of water that's coming down through here.
No, they've done a very good job of building resiliency into the system with this system of reservoirs and creeks and conveyance of water and treatment and things like that. Now, it's not without its challenges. I mean, of course, certain times of the year you could have turbidity issues and things like that, and that can be a problem. But I mean, that's what happens.
Truly.
This is sometimes, this is one of the benefits of using groundwater is that you're not subject to that type of problem with turbidity seasonally. Groundwater is an extremely good source of water. It's been purified by the earth, and there's plenty of it. As a matter of fact, when you actually look at the amount of water that flows in rivers and creeks and in lakes and things like that, in the global grand scheme of things, of the fresh water that in this world, that's like 2.5% of the world's fresh water water is fresh, and the balance is saline. 60% is locked up in the ice caps and the glaciers, and about 30% is groundwater, and about 0.01% or less is what you see. And
Really?
so that is
Really?
something that people don't realize, is that we're fighting over scraps when the loaf of bread, the aquifer, is right there, underneath your feet.
Underground.
It's just because you can't see it. So that's sometimes a difficult concept to get across, but nonetheless, it's the reality. And my job is to find that water and of sufficient quantity and quality for its intended purpose, and ensure that water is developed sustainably.
Right.
And so we need to do our predictive calculations and understand the influence, drawdown influence on that one well will have on another well, and that's why we go into that rigor, that reporting rigor that we need to, so we can put it in front of people, and hopefully they can understand it. And if they don't, then please come talk to me, because I will take you through it. That's my job as a professional.
That's kind of difficult. I mean, I'm obviously, the report that you prepared for us and the development that we're doing next door was, I found very fascinating. I just love all of the information in it. I love how you laid it all out. It seemed very difficult to argue with that rigor, that amount of fact in one spot. How could it possibly be that the municipality regional district would be able to refute and not apply your findings to their administrative reports for rezoning?
I think you'd have to ask them. I mean, at the end of the day, I think I've done my due diligence, and I've provided that report. I've stamped it, certified it. I'm hoping that it's getting into the right hands. Certainly, not everybody is as well versed in this, and you need to get the right people looking at the information so they can interpret it. But at the end of the day, I mean, my responsibility is to explain it, and so I hope I've done it. I've done it in a way that will transcend a lot of different levels, right? The technical information is in there for the people that need it, and I think the perspective is in there for others that that will go past that and just say, okay, but give me, what does this all mean?
Yeah, what's the emotional content of this report? Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about putting in some domestic water wells, not even the Meadow Valley Aquifer for that matter. Mm-hmm. It's in a different system, and it's in a bedrock system that is weakly connected, if that, toward that system. And we're taking out small amounts of water compared to what's being taken out of the Meadow Valley Aquifer. Like, it's almost difficult to understand why there's so much concern about this. Mm-hmm.
It is.
All the projections that are made about the drawdown, I mean, we're going out like half a meter or a few meters from a well that's pumped for a few minutes to fill up a tank, and then it turns off and it replenishes. Yeah. It's unfortunate, the situation that we get ourselves into. It's almost like we make a stick for our own back here. The district wants to develop.
Well,
right? They want to bring in a tax base.
Yeah.
This is a very desirable place to be. And if this is all about shutting down development, then I think I've moved to the wrong place. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's the case. I think we're doing prudent development. People need to live somewhere. People need to develop their lands. And if this is getting hung up on groundwater, then we're chasing the wrong thing here.
I mean, John, I would tend to support what you've just proposed with the following. And this, again, is coming out of the Summerland, who manages this raceway of water with all of the 11 dams that they have going on up here. Summerland manages a flow in Trout Creek and has an annual water license with the Ministry of Forests for 34,574 megaliters. The water license that we have in Falder is for 59 megaliters.
Yeah.
How could it possibly be that we would ever be in a situation where our elected officials and or the bureaucrats that work for them would be able to say to us with a straight face that we are running out of water and expect us to believe them? I mean, we're way past, I think we're way past the point of that. There's so much access to information now. It's not that we're running out of water, it's that we're running out of water license. We're nearing our potential water license. Is that what, but you can't say that because that doesn't mean anything to people. People aren't going to respond to that. They'll be, well, what's a water license? Who cares about that? Is there water in the creek? I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
So it seems strange to me that there wouldn't be room, even in the limited domestic system that we have in Falder, for expansion of this 59 megaliter service license that we have, when Summerland, just out of this raceway of water, has 34,574 megaliters.
Yeah. One thing that people need to understand is that when a license is acquired, you don't just license for the amount you need today. You license for what you need in the future. It gives you the growth, gives you the bandwidth.
Okay.
So Summerland is growing. They have a large license. They need that license to service the community, right?
And they also have a big agricultural component.
Correct. So that water needs to be there, and they need to be able to develop into the future. It's the same thing here. The license here, it's a smaller license, but Falder is smaller, right? There's 280 people here or something like that, if that. Yeah. And most of the wells are probably domestic, so they're not using a lot of water. And so there's room to grow there. Now, those licenses, I'd have to look into it a bit more. Is it just surface water, or is it surface water and groundwater? I don't know. but it's still a large amount that's probably not getting used. Now, I worked on a study in Alberta for an arm's length agency, Alberta Innovates, Alberta Water Research Institute, where we actually did a study of and an inventory of all the water in the province.
Wow.
Yeah, we looked at surface water, groundwater, water stored in the glaciers, snowpack, the whole thing.
Unbelievable.
Right? And you know, because people in Alberta are going like, geez, you know, we don't have a lot of water. When you actually found out how much water there was, it was quite surprising. And again, most of it was groundwater. And people were, again, getting that perception that, you know, geez, we're running out of water. And it's like, well, but you haven't even looked at what's underneath your feet here. So that's ridiculous. But at the end of the day, looking at all the licensing and the allocations, maybe 50% of what was getting licensed was used. In a lot of cases, it was
Even
probably
the
like
licenses.
20 or 30%. And that doesn't even include the water that goes back into the system as a non-consumptive situation. So again, people see these numbers, they get scared because they're big, and it's like, well, that's the context. That's for growth in the future. We're not using all of it right now. Mm-hmm. It's certainly being managed because people have eyes on. And areas like this are looking at it, bringing in conservation and management plans. That's fine. But let's do it for the right reasons and because it can stifle development. And if we're trying to bring people in, that's not helping by setting up certain situations like that basically say, well, no, we can't develop anymore because we've run out of water.
Yeah,
no. Because it's a misperception. Like that's just not reasonable.
So on that, when we are looking at, again, I'm referencing the Summerland Master Plan document, water demands have reduced, as we've talked about, in the last 12 years from an annual demand of 12,250 megaliters to 8,930 megaliters. So to your point, if we have a license in place on Trout Creek for 34,000 megaliters, and we're only total using in Summerland every year 8,900 of that. I mean,
yeah, there's plenty. There's plenty.
To your point, what you were saying, like even the licenses, we're not even using 30% of our license.
Yeah.
Not even close to 30% of our license.
Yeah.
So I'm going, how could it possibly be that our elected officials and bureaucrats are telling us in Falder that we're running out of water? This seems like just complete lunacy to me.
Yeah. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves.
It's difficult to argue with that. I mean, this is a very expensive document. Both of these documents, the Meadow Valley Aquifer study was $130,000.
Yeah.
This water master plan, this is a 230-page document.
Yeah.
I mean, this is probably like $250,000. I don't know what they spent on this. Yeah. These aren't like people that do this on the weekend. No. These are people just like you that didn't make any of this up.
This is, you know, what's interesting is that there's still doubt and questions out there after the significant amount of effort and financial resources that have gone into understanding the Meadow Valley Aquifer. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be honest, that's probably one of the most well-known systems in our province. I mean, certainly there's others that are well monitored and looked at and understood, but rarely do you get that level of
scrutiny.
Yeah, seriously.
Really?
And that's probably good because there's a concern. Now remember, a concern does not equate to an issue. A concern is a concern and an issue is an issue, right? Understand people's concerns. Let's figure out if it's an issue. Mm-hmm. If it's an issue, then we'll deal with it. How do we understand if it's an issue? Well, we monitor and we look at things and we look at trends, and if things are going in a direction at a rate that we don't like, there's an issue. Mm-hmm. We'll do something about it. So really, but until that happens,
we're gonna live in fear?
No, I think we just get on with it.
Just get on with it.
Right?
Yeah.
And really, at the end of the day, I mean, you can't equate what's happening in the Meadow Valley Aquifer to what's happening in the bedrock, because they're totally different systems.
Yes.
You know, and so that needs to be something that resonates with people. It's like someone wants to put in a water well in the bedrock. They're going to be taking a small amount of water. What's the big deal? There is no big deal. It's not going to have an impact at all.
So what do we say to our neighbors that say, well, we don't want any more development around here because there's no water? How do you reason with such what would be classified as an ignorant perspective?
My first question would be, well, what are you basing that on? Why do you think there's no water in this area? Please tell me, because I need to understand your concerns before I can actually start figuring out what the root cause is in there.
Right.
And it usually is something simple as not understanding how the system works, right? And that it's variable throughout the year. And you might be looking at it at a certain time and formulating your position and opinions, and really that's just not the case. These are dynamic systems. They respond to climatic variation. Sometimes the things might not, the water levels might be lower, sometimes they're higher. When are you looking at it? So really, at the end of the day,
right.
Yeah, you're not looking at the whole picture. You're getting a fragmented picture or understanding of this system, and it's driving an opinion. And
it's driving an emotion, which is driving an opinion.
Well, and that's part of the problem. When it becomes emotional, then it's all bets are off, right? And we've seen this happen, you know, in the media, the social media, and how things can get really, really off the track.
Yeah.
Right. My job is to keep it on the track.
You're an engineer.
Whether or not you want to believe it is irrelevant.
Yes.
Right? Facts are facts. The truth is the truth. There's no alternative truth. Yeah. Okay? There's the truth. That's it. If you don't like it, too bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't bend the truth to your perception at the expense of everybody else. And because that is becoming selfish now.
That's a really beautiful statement. That's a really beautiful way of saying that. It's really honest, isn't it, what you just said? It's tough to argue with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be one thing for my neighbor and I to have a disagreement. It would be another thing to hire an arbiter, such as yourself, to come in and preside over our argument with science and lay down a verdict, right? Which is essentially what we've done in getting you to do this study for us. But you and I both know that it is at the discretion of the municipalities to accept the findings of your study.
That's correct.
And predicate policy off of it. That can be very frustrating if they don't accept it, because it flies in the face of what could potentially be an anti-development, anti-human bent, which we're seeing more and more of in some of these institutions and bureaucracies, where they're being infiltrated by people who have a certain way of thinking about humans, and all the humans need to be kind of pushed over into what they're calling primary growth areas, like the District of Summerland or Penticton or whatever, and we don't want people living out in the forest anymore. And that is actually what they're doing. That's what they're saying in the Regional Growth Strategy Bylaw. That's what they're proving through these policies that they're pushing through, like the Falder Zoning Review. So they're proving it by their actions, they're proving it through their documents. It seems as though that landowners are kind of like, if they're not going to listen to the engineers and they're not going to listen to us, what chance do we have of doing what we want with our own land? It seems like it's their land, and by their grace, we're living on it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. Well, there's avenues to pursue. Of course, we've talked about these. You know, if there needs to be another level of scrutiny, it can certainly go that way. It can go all the way to the legal system if it needs to. Which you don't want that happening, because it's usually just misunderstandings, and you know. But if there's an agenda, there's an agenda. You know, people have a right to live where they want, you know, within reason. Falder developed many, many years ago, and people moved out here because they wanted a lifestyle. And I don't think it's fair to deny people that if they want to have a certain lifestyle. Now, if you think you're growing beyond a sustainable bound, then fine. But you got to demonstrate that. You can't just say it. That's not fair. And really what you're messing with is people's lives.
You've got to demonstrate it. You can't just say it.
Well, please. I mean, this world, is built on truth and proof. I mean, that's our system. If that's not the system anymore, then we're in bigger trouble than I thought. And really, but I don't believe that that's the case. I think it's just reason has to prevail. And when presented with a reasonable argument, you need to be able to accept it, even if it doesn't mesh with your beliefs, when you're in a position of making decisions on behalf of a population.
Yes.
That's important. That's called responsibility.
And objectivity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, if that system fails us, then I think we're in bigger trouble than I thought.
When people stop listening to engineers, we're in bigger trouble than we thought. Because that's essentially what's happening. I'm reading the Coles Notes versions of the Meadow Valley Aquifer study that were presented to planning back in September of last year, saying no need to limit domestic use in the Trout Creek subaquifer region, which is exactly where we're located. And we are being painted with this huge no water brush.
And where you're wanting to develop water is not even in that system. And so, which is, kind of strange to me that why everybody keeps pointing to this system, we have to protect it. And I'm going like, yeah, but I'm not even in that system. Like, I don't even know why I'm having to be stewarding to this because I'm not in it. I won't be in it. And so it almost seems like the arguments got somewhat convoluted and twisted. And that's unfortunate. But at the end of the day, it's affecting people. Yeah. And it's getting them emotional. And they're hearing things that aren't based in fact, that aren't backed up with anything. And that's dangerous. I mean, we know where that can go in this society. We've seen it happen. Yeah. I'm not prepared to go there, and I don't think anybody should be prepared to go there because once you go there, we're heading in a bad direction. Truly. Yeah.
Well, John, I think that we've probably covered most of what I wanted to talk to you about today in a roundabout way. I really obviously appreciate your background in this and your dedication to your trade, because I mean, it is what's underground is unknown, as you said. Yeah. And to somebody who is not classically trained in this discipline, like it's just a completely different world under there. Yeah. So for you to comb over all of the information that you did in order to verify what it is that we're doing is going to have minimal to no impact was very promising for us. And we hope that the people that are presiding over this decision eventually will see it the way the trained professionals see it, and that they would be absolved of any liability under your seal.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you said.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate your time in explaining all of this to us, or to me today, and to anybody else who's going to watch this.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great.